Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today, I want to talk about fear and loneliness on the spiritual path. This is not a topic that is often talked about, but it is a reality that people experience on the spiritual path. Because, the spiritual path is not just goodness and roses and, you know, good experiences day after day, second after second, and so on. There are ups and downs, and there are things that are difficult that have to be faced. So let me start off by talking about fear from the point of view of sometimes religion creates fear. And what I mean by that is a religion sometimes tells stories that says, if you don't behave, there will be a flood. If you don't behave, there will be a plague. If you don't behave, you will go to a very hot place after you die. If you don't behave, you will be left in darkness. And those kinds of warnings are given to audiences whose sense of self is so tight and hard and so off the path that the only thing that they can respond to is a threat. And so we are talking here about people who, like in the language of the Quran, the heart doesn't understand, the heart cannot see. There is a disease in the heart. And so the person is acting very arrogant, very selfish, very demeaning of others, and often violent of others. Because if you look at history, if you look at certain conflicts around the world, there are tyrants, there are dictators, there are people who just really oppress the masses. They oppress other people. And so we're talking about a personality and an individual and groups of individuals whose sense of self and what they're doing in the world is so hard and so tight and so resistant to any goodness that the religion brings a message of threat and judgment and condemnation to kind of break that shell open to try to get in there. And what ultimately happens is, we carry those stories and the points of views of those stories with us, even though we may not be the audience for that. And then religion gets presented to the public as something fear-inducing. God will judge the sinners. God will send them to, hot places after they leave this world. God will turn his face away from them. God will withdraw his mercy from them, and so on and so forth. And so religion, there's a side of religion in addressing a particular audience that then gets spread out to everybody. And so everyone gets this idea that, religion is something threatening to me, and it's something makes me scared, makes me fearful about my future and the actual character and nature of God, And some, preachers and people who kind of lead religious congregations feed into that. They continue to give their community these fearful messages about religion, and so the community becomes very scared, and they do religion out of fear, and they do religion out of this notion that God is just waiting to kind of just smack them for being human, being just being in this world and making mistakes and things like that. And so there's a lot of shame around that, and that creates a lot of fear, in religious people. And the other aspect of fear is, as human beings, we have a something in us that resists the truth, and it resists goodness, and it resists beauty, and that's part of our human inheritance in this world, and it is part of our challenge. It is part of our path, and these are kind of obstacles on our path. And the ultimate resistance is resistance to God, resistance to Allah, where we talk about God, and we talk about being close to God and wanting to be close to God and wanting to obey his rules and commandments and things like that. But he is so bigger than us, and he is so other than us, that otherness of God brings up a lot of fear, so like if God right now started speaking to you in words that were as loud as my words right now, you would be scared. You would be scared because in your experience, there hasn't been anything like that happening, right? So in your experience, that would be a very frightening thing. And if you look at history, there are moments in the Prophet's life, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was in the cave, and he first received the message from the angel Gabriel. He was shaking. He went back home to Khadijah, and his clothes were filled with sweat, and he was shaking. It was such a big and tremendous and traumatic experience, even though it was a good force, is his good creator speaking to him, talking to him, communicating to him. There was a lot of fear there. And so there is this role of fear on the path where it is, either we're not sure about God's character, or we are resistant to having our world turned upside down if we ever, started speaking to angels or actually had a conversation with God, and so on. And, in our thoughts, we do. But if it got any more vivid and visceral and louder, it would affect us, and there would be fear there. The other kind of third aspect of fear is, this idea that the spiritual path will ask you to grow in ways that you were not anticipating. And when it does that, you naturally have a tendency to resist, to hold back, to pull back, to not move forward. The spiritual path will say, there are things that are embedded in your heart and mind, and they have been there as experiences or thoughts or impressions or feelings or something that you didn't want to look at, but they got kind of, embedded in there, and they are now blocking you. They're blocking your progress. They're blocking your advancement on the spiritual path. So you've got to do some investigative work and kind of get in there and dig up those things and bring them out and look at them, and look at them. And some of this has to do with, our childhood, psychology, modern psychology has, noticed. Some of this has to do with our own inheritance as, as a human species, our own dealing with our sense of weakness, frailty, ignorance, death, being embarrassed, our own visions of what success looked like, and how we sometimes feel like, oh, we didn't get there, and so there's a shame and embarrassment around that. Or, we are spiritual beings from another, a larger or more encompassing dimension, and we are down here in a very kind of limited scope of experiences. And there is a kind of sadness there that, reminds us of where we once were, that nostalgia for that larger life. And so all of this stuff brings up a lot of fear. And we, oftentimes ignore it. And, sometimes, honestly, sometimes we don't even know that that's what it is, right? Wouldn't you agree? We don't even know that that's what it is. And sometimes, we wake up feeling sad. Or we walk around just feeling sad. And, everything might be going all right in life. Your family is good, your business is good, your health is good, whatever. Everything is good. On a surface level, everything is good. But underneath, there's something doesn't feel right. Something doesn't feel right. And we're too scared to look at it. There is this kind of basic sadness, disappointment, something. There's something there. We're too scared to look at it. And if we don't have a method telling us, hey, you got to slow down, stop, and take a look at what you're feeling right now, because there's something for you to look at. If we don't have that, then events will be orchestrated in such a way to force us to look at it. So, for example, when there has been similar situations in my life, I will all of a sudden get sick, and I'll be in bed for 3 days, and I'm forced to stop and can't do anything. I've got a fever, my head hurts, just everything aches, I've got a flu or whatever it is. It forces you to stop. And it says, hey, there's something for you to look at. There's something down here. Can you spend a little time to dig that up? What is that? Or, some larger event happens, like you lose a job, or you lose a family member or something, and it forces you to stop. And it kind of forces you to reevaluate, review, revise. Who are you? What are you doing here in this world? What do you want to do in this world? What do you want to do with your remaining time? Every day you have an opportunity to answer that question. And there is a kind of fear there to deal with that question too much or too often, because it will put you outside your usual social world, right? Because if you look around, everyone around you is, they're into their families, they're into their business, they're into their school, they're into their community, they're into their neighborhood. It's all very terrestrial. It's all very, like this world, this culture, this life, this routine, this mold of civilization that we've got. And when you start thinking bigger, you start thinking about spirit, spiritual path, and things like that, it breaks you out of that mold. And guess what? You may be the only one doing it at that time. Other people around you are just in the routine. Life isn't stopping them. Life isn't asking them, hey, I need you to look at something. Life is not doing that to them. It's doing it to you. So there's a kind of loneliness that comes on the spiritual path, because you may not immediately find somebody else going through the exact same thing. Also, the stuff that comes up, it's your stuff. Other people don't get to have the exact same stuff. But there might be somebody on the other side of town that's going through it. There might be somebody in another city, another country, another part of the world going through it. Because, God is trying to wake up everybody, and only a few people are kind of responding to his call. A lot of other people are kind of busy with the routine, and we get very busy with our routines. And sometimes whole years go by when we're busy with our routines. I remember when my kids were little, man, it was all I could do to just go to work, take care of kids, go to work, take care of my wife and kids and family, and go to work, take care of my kids. I didn't have time for anything else. And so there are years and seasons where we do that, but there's also this time to kind of, look at this routine and kind of break out and say, what is it that I'm really wanting? And not be afraid. Not be afraid. You can feel fear and you can feel loneliness, but it doesn't mean that they have substantial reality. You can have these feelings, and they're legitimate feelings. You can honor them as feelings, but you're not your feelings. At the end of the day, you are not your feelings. You are this pure spiritual being, supported by love, supported by rahmah. Allah calls himself in the Quran Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. So that Rahman and Rahim is holding you. And you can say to Allah, I have this fear in my heart, and I don't want it anymore. Can you please take it from me? If you do the work to go into your mind and heart and pull out those fears and just look at them. This is a fear I picked up when I was a child. This is a fear I picked up when I was in college. This is a fear I picked up 5 years ago when I had kids. This is a fear I picked up when I suddenly got fired from a job. This is a fear I picked up when I did something very, very bad and just haven't felt good about myself since. If you're able to just kind of dig and bring those out and just look at them and say, you may have served a role for me, but now I'm ready to release you. Ya Allah, please take this from me. I don't want to carry this anymore. I only want to carry your grace and your rahmah in my heart. Watch what happens. Watch what happens. Allah desires to free you from all fear. And loneliness is the biggest illusion we've got. Because Allah and all his angels and all his prophets and all his imams and all his saints and all his bodhisattvas and all his, the entire spiritual hierarchy of heaven is with you all the time. If you imagine you have a stadium filled with angels rooting for you. You have a stadium full of angels rooting for you. And so fear on the spiritual path is a necessary thing, but it's something for us to identify, look at, and release. Identify, look at, release. And we can keep working with fear that way and bringing it curiosity, bringing it compassion, bringing it love, bringing it rahmah and rahim, and letting it release, and knowing that we are never, ever, ever, ever lonely, because Allah is always with us, and he is, as he says in the Quran, closer to us than our jugular vein. He is right where we are, always. And so we use the remembrance of Allah to get centered in that. And so even though fear and loneliness are part of the path, they don't have to be big parts of the path, and they can be released. And we can move forward with courage and grace and compassion.